Hey guys, it's Jeff. This video is going to be about gun owner insurance and whether it's a good idea or not, coming up after this. Alright guys, I'm back. So this video is going to be dry, it's going to be a little boring, it's going to, talk about the law and things like that. It's not going to be exciting, gun type stuff. This is more of the political aspect of gun ownership. And one of the things that we're hearing a lot more now at the federal level is about gun owners' liability insurance. Now, that's going to be a little different than defensive use insurance, but I'm going to discuss both of them in this video. So when it comes to gun owners buying a liability policy, the reason that they're doing that, politicians, after the Sandy Hook shooting in Connecticut, there was a lot of talk about gun owner liability. After the shooting, there really wasn't anybody to hold accountable. The shooter himself had suicide, and prior to that, he murdered his own mother. So there was really nobody who could have been held liable. This guy was a mental health problem, and he shouldn't have had access to firearms, but he didn't. Technically, his mother did, and she was murdered in the course of him acquiring those firearms. So there was really nobody to hold accountable. So politicians took that as a way to, hey, how can we provide the community some redress? Let's pass a law that says that people need to carry a liability policy if they own a firearm. So in the event something bad like this happens, then you can sue that insurance policy and people can get paid out. And that, the ethics of that are questionable at best. But what that did do is it did spur up a conversation from some enterprising minds about defensive use insurance. That's what the focus of this conversation is going to try to address is, does gun owner insurance provide you the defense that you need in the event that you have to use your firearm for a life safety issue? So the first question is mandatory versus voluntary. I mean, there are pushes out there to make the liability insurance mandatory, but there's no real drive that I'm aware of yet to make a defensive policy a mandatory policy. So if you're talking about the defensive use policies, that's a liability issue for the individual gun owner to consider. There's nothing mandating that yet. Now, as far as the punitive insurance that politicians are talking about forcing upon all gun owners, that's something that you can only address with your legislature. So I'm focused on the private individual insurance, not the mandatory aspect of it. But just be aware that there are insurance companies, or there are politicians out there who want to pressure insurance companies to make a mandatory liability insurance policy for all gun ownership. That'd be punitive. It would be a Jim Crow type law where you would have to give something in order to exercise something as far as your rights go, and that I don't think would withstand constitutional muster, but that would never stop a congressman from trying to get something passed like that. So another issue I have is when it comes to conflicts of interest. So there are conflicts of interest in the self-defense insurance game, namely the NRA's policy that they're selling. My issue with that is the NRA is a rights group. They should be focused on protecting the gun owners from egregious liability lawsuits and even criminal lawsuits or criminal cases that come in the form of use of force, or when you have to use force to defend yourself. There should be certain levels of inherent immunity if it can be proven that this was a self-defense case. Instead, what you have in a lot of states is you have an affirmative defense to self-defense where they charge you first, and then as a defense to the prosecution, you claim that it was required upon you to use self-defense in order to preserve your own life, that the actor was acting upon you and the only way to stop that actor was to use force to kill that person. So one is automatically going to be very expensive, and the other one is going to put a lot of the liability of proof back on the state and not on the individual. So, the NRA selling you an insurance policy that doesn't address the legal aspects, I think, is a conflict of interest for the NRA. So that kind of leads me into, should you buy insurance? Well, that's a question that really only you can answer, right? So, you've got insurance companies out there that are capitalizing on the aspect that fear motivates people to make decisions. So if you're fearful that you're going to lose your life, or lose your liberty, you're going to go to prison for the rest of your life, your wife's going to have to mortgage the house, you're going to get divorced, your kids are going to grow up in poverty, etc., and you want a little bit of a nest egg there to protect against the possibility that you are going to be prosecuted. Having an insurance policy may be right for you. If you can just barely afford your gun and you don't have a lot to lose, do you need to go and get an insurance policy like this in order to exercise your right to the Second Amendment and exercise your inherent right to self-defense? Then it may not be right for you, and that may the cost may be prohibitive, and it may not be a requirement. A lot of these insurance companies will prey upon the lack of knowledge on the individual gun owner. A lot of people like guns. They go out and they use guns in the military. They own guns, from an early age. It's something that's traditional in their family. They're hunters. They're, survivalists. They're enthusiasts of some sort. And guns have always been part of the culture of their life. But they don't take the time to understand the legal aspects of how a defensive use of that firearm could impact them. So these insurance companies, the Carry Guard and the U.S. Law Shield and CCW Safe and et cetera, USCCA, what they're doing is they're preying upon the ignorant gun owner to try to convince them that, through fear, that it's better to have this pot of gold that you can tap into in the event that you ever have to protect yourself, than it is to not have that pot of gold because of the financial catastrophe that could befall you. So that's a legit fear. The more you have, the more you could risk losing. However, there are better ways to address that I'm going to cover a little later on in this video. So another thing to consider is, you've got the criminal aspect of any liability, but you also have a civil aspect. So in a lot of states, actually, you could be found not guilty in a criminal lawsuit, but in a civil suit, you could still find that you're liable for a wrongful death. The level of guilt or the level of responsibility is different in the two. In a criminal case, it's beyond a reasonable doubt. In a civil case, it's preponderance of the evidence. So preponderance just means that there has to be a percentage of people who feel you're guilty in order for you to be convicted. Now, I'm not an attorney. I probably should have started this video with that, and I may go back and edit it, but I'm not an attorney, so this is where I've taken the opportunity to understand the law, and I try to stay abreast of the law, so I'm not as vulnerable as a lot of people are. I don't carry any of this insurance, but I really do have to invest a lot of time trying to keep up with the laws in the state that I live in. So, that's something to consider as well. So there's, affirmative defense, which I discussed earlier. They try you, and then in the case, you have to then convince people that why you did it was appropriate. Whereas if it was strictly you're inherent in your defense, the state has to prove that you violated that defensive aspect and you are negligent in your application of defense. They're just two different ways of looking at it. Every state is different, and that's where legislation and being involved in government could really make a difference in your state if you could get those laws changed. Another one is immunity from prosecution. Stand your ground enters that into it. However, that doesn't remove all liability. If you were negligent, if you were grossly negligent, and there was no reason for you to have to use your firearm to defend yourself, then the immunity defense may not come into play, and you could still be charged. And there's other things, ethics of the prosecutor, how you present yourself to law enforcement, that sort of thing, which I'll get into that in a minute as well. So with that, there's also, moving into the next aspect of this conversation, is the cost of the insurance. If you're paying, and I'm just going to throw out some base numbers here, but if you're paying, say, $50 a month into an insurance policy, and you're a very low risk of ever having to use that insurance policy, would you be better served in putting $50 into a savings account? Or could you find a policy that may provide a better plan for you, but at the same time you're still advocating, you're still supporting some of these other organizations that fight unethical laws? The state has unlimited resources. The individuals have very limited resources. So far too often the government will use that disparity of finances in order to get convictions on people who just can't fight, don't have the means to fight, etc., which is another reason why you may consider buying a policy. I know this is dry, and I appreciate it if you're still with me, but I got a couple more things to talk about. So, ways to limit exposure. The situation arises that you hope you never had to experience, and now you're making decisions based off of what? Are you basing it off of your existing knowledge, your training that you've had, any reading you've done? Are you basing it off of your feelings, your emotions? Are you scared? Are you reacting? Are you fearful of this person because of whatever the situation's occurring? You have to be able to articulate that, right? So if you have never had any training and you're basing this based off of your ignorance, what you watched on television or something, you may put yourself in a liability situation that you can't get out of, and it may cost you your life. And I don't think that a lot of these policies are going to prevent you from going to prison for the rest of your life if you use your firearm in an illegal manner. Even with Stand Your Ground, even with Castle Doctrine, even with the most comprehensive insurance plan out there, you could still go to prison for the rest of your life if you use your gun in an illegal way, and there was no reason for you to do so. So understanding the law, getting training, get law training, get defensive use training or defensive firearm training, get training in aspects of de-escalation of hostile situations, and know what to do after you've pulled that trigger. You've pulled your trigger, you pulled the trigger, you've killed someone, they're laying on the ground bleeding. What do you do now? What are your responsibilities to render aid to that individual? Do you have to render aid? Should you render aid? Getting 911 there, getting the police there. What do you tell the police when they arrive? I've seen some stuff out there where they talk about never talking to the police, that everything you say can and will be used against you, and with emphasis on the will be used against you. Everything you say is being recorded now on body cams, on car cams. They're going to take you down to the station. They're going to put cameras in the witness interview room. You're being recorded. Everything you say is being recorded. If you say the wrong thing, that snippet of statement could be used in a trial against you. It could make or break your defense to a criminal prosecution. So be very leery about what you say. And there's guidance out there about what to say, what not to say. I've always been told don't say anything. Other than I feared for my life. If that's the case, I feared for my life, and I didn't see any other way to move forward, and I'd like to speak to an attorney. Anything other than that, they're going to try to use social engineering to try to convince you to talk. They want to get your side of the story. They want to use threats of going to jail. They want to use pressure and intimidation that it's for your best interest, but it's really not for your best interest. So, please consider that. Get training, understand those legal aspects if you have to use your firearm. And then the last topic I wanted to cover in this is, should you buy it? Well, I appreciate it if you've made it this far in the video. I think that's a personal choice. I think there's a lot of reasons to go either way. One of the big things I will stress, or I can't stress enough, is if you're going to buy insurance and you're going to make that investment to buy insurance, you still have to get educated and you still have to stay active with your politicians. Don't ignore your responsibility as a citizen just because you've now bought an insurance policy. You haven't bought a policy that's going to vote for you. You haven't bought a policy that's going to keep you out of jail if you make a mistake. So you still have responsibility to know the law, understand the law, respect the law, and be a voice to change the law if the law is something that you don't agree with. So that's all I got for this video, guys. I'm sure this is going to be probably pretty long. If you made it this far, I really appreciate it. You can find me on other social media outlets. You can get me on Instagram, Gunstreamer, BitChute, and on Facebook. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. And I always appreciate the thumbs up button. That's it, and I'll see you next time. Stay safe.